Thank you for joining the webinar this afternoon. So this is around the digital switchover and its impact on businesses specifically. So without further ado, just a quick bit of housekeeping. This session is being recorded, and we will make the recording available later, so that if anyone who isn't able to join and wants to view it, they can, and also for you guys to refer back to if you needed to. Obviously, you've all got your cameras off, and I can see you're all muted, so that deals with the next one. And we'll just ask that you keep them off and muted if you're not a speaker, in which case we can ask questions later on in the session. So, my name is Steve Smith. I'm a principal consultant at FarrPoint. We are an independent consultancy that was commissioned by the Connect and Cambridgeshire team to do these sessions for SMEs across Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. They're also running a parallel set of activity aimed at residential users of telephony to make them aware of the changes resulting from the digital switchover. But there was an acknowledgement that there was a gap in information to SMEs specifically, so we were commissioned to do that. So, getting straight into it, what is the digital switchover and why does it matter? You may know something about this already, or you may not, but basically BT and Openreach behind them made the decision to decommission their analog telephony network. That means that all of the lines that we use for our telephony services and anything else that plugs into a phone line are being moved to digital technology. Quite a lot of the lines have already been moved over on a residential front, so almost 3/4 are already done. So, this is not something that's brand new. And originally this was due to be completed by December 2025, so this year, but they pushed that deadline back to January 2027 because they were having some challenges with some of the more difficult use cases, specifically around vulnerable users, people who rely on things like telecare devices, fall pendants you wear around your neck, those kind of devices, and some industrial uses as well. It's also worth noting this is not just a BT issue. All of the telephone providers are doing the same thing. They're all doing it at slightly different paces. They all have their own timeline and process for doing it. So, for example, TalkTalk haven't started yet. Virgin Media are just in the earlier stages of theirs, but they are ongoing with their planning and actually making this happen. It's also worth saying that this is not location-based. So the plan isn't to go north to south or east to west or cities first and then rural. It's being provider-led, and it is being led by when areas reach a certain threshold of digital connectivity and where they have engineering resource and where they have customer service resource to deal with inquiries, that's where they're doing. So in reality, it's happening all over the country at the same time to different degrees. I would also just add that this is not a government-led initiative. This is being led by industry. The reason they're doing it is that equipment is aging. It is becoming expensive to maintain. Lots of the people who were around at the time that this was commissioned and know the most about it are now retiring, and it's difficult to replace those skills. So for lots of reasons, including energy efficiency, they've decided to move away from the older technology and go to new technology. So I've talked a little bit about what's changing there. That there are some challenges with that. Some systems, some telephone systems, some other associated things, payment terminals, for example, may not work with the new digital lines natively, or if they do work, they may not always reliably work, which is a challenge. There's also a secondary issue, which actually all of the new digital lines rely on having power at the user's premise, residential or business premise. Whereas traditionally, if you had a copper phone line, even if you had no power, you could pick that up and make a phone call. Notwithstanding, most of us had cordless phones, which did need power. But if you had an old-fashioned corded phone that plugged into the wall, you could still make a phone call even in a power cut. And so that's quite a big change, and that won't be the case anymore. I guess the question we get asked a lot is, why does that matter? Excuse me. And the reason is that new digital networks aren't designed to carry those analog signals anymore. So, when most of the old analog telephony was audio based, noise based, which is why, if you remember an old modem or a fax machine, you'd hear all of those squealing noises. Well, that's because that's what it used to transmit and receive on that line, sound. Digital networks don't work like that, and they use zeros and ones, as you'll know. So that means that when they try to carry those signals, they don't always arrive as was intended. So the example I have on screen at the moment, if that was a smoke alarm system in a building, it might send that ABC123 message to tell the receiving center there's a smoke alarm being triggered, you need to take some action. Whether that's actually received in the right way or whether it gets garbled as it's being transmitted and received, there is a chance that could happen with using an analog device on a digital line. So that's why it's quite important to kind of be aware of this and what that might mean for your business. In terms of the kind of things that are impacted by this, now this is not an exhaustive set of imagery or examples. They are only examples. So it could be phone systems. If you're a business that has 2 or 3 phones, that those phone systems may not work as intended anymore. If you have one of the older, more traditional point of sale terminals, they use phone lines typically, and they might not work in quite the same way. Fax machines, unfortunately, there are still some of those around, as much as that upsets me. Franking machines, if you're a business that sends out a lot of direct mail, some businesses use franking machines, and again, they were typically connected to a phone line to top up their balance and manage them. Alarm panels we've already talked about, both fire and intruder. Lifts is a slightly obscure one, but if you're in, whether you have a building of your own as a business or whether you are a tenant in a building that has lifts, the emergency button in lifts has always traditionally been provided by an analog phone line connected to the lift, and those won't work either. So they're looking at how they replace those, so that if people are unfortunate enough to get stuck in a lift, and they are able to still notify someone and get help. As I say, these are only examples. The images aren't, they don't represent any specific brand or type of equipment. They are just examples. But there will be a myriad of other things that you may or may not have in your business that would be impacted by this change. So it is really worth thinking about, what you use telephony for, what you have plugged into those phone sockets. In terms of what needs to happen, it's quite simple. If you have analog telephone lines and things plugged into those lines, they need to be changed to digital alternatives. So that means the line needs to change itself. That means that the equipment might need to change. Potentially, you might move away from using fixed telephony and might just use mobile telephony. Lots of people do that. Or you might actually move away from telephony entirely if you don't need to be able to make voice calls or send that kind of information. And you might just use sensor type things, which is what the IoT bit is at the bottom. So in terms of what those upgrade options are, unfortunately, there isn't a golden list or master list that you can refer to, which says what those upgrade options are by application. But in simple terms, you might need to replace or move that phone line to a digital, and you might need to replace or upgrade the equipment that's connected to that. There are some challenges around that. And these sessions are one of the ways we're trying to address some of that. Finding information is quite tricky, when it is happening in your particular location, whether your equipment will be compatible and work okay or whether it won't, et cetera, et cetera. Finding that information is quite difficult. I also appreciate that in many SMEs, there won't necessarily have been a budget allocated to having to change phone lines or phone systems or other things connected to a phone line. So there is a cost implication almost certainly. This takes time. It takes someone who knows what they're talking about to be able to help do these things. So, resource and skills challenge. And as with so many things in life at the moment, there is also some issues with mis-selling. We've had examples where we've been told people have received calls from companies saying, we can move your line early, we can move it on a guaranteed day, we can do it tomorrow. It's going to cost you £20, and then we'll make sure you're done tomorrow. None of that's true. No, none of the telephone providers, Openreach, TalkTalk, Virgin, and all of the others, none of them offer a service where you can pay to jump the queue. So please be aware of that. But we have had mis-selling reports on the equipment side as well, where people are being told, yes, your bit of equipment definitely won't work with these new lines, whether in fact that's true or not. So, just be wary of that, I think. As I say, there's a few things you can choose to do. So you could choose to, you might decide, actually, you know what, I don't need a phone line anymore. I did that personally at my own house when my line changed. I decided I didn't need a landline anymore. I just use my mobile, and that works fine for me. But as a business, I appreciate that might not be quite so feasible. And you can move to a digital solution, and whatever that entails. You can remove the equipment for a phone line altogether, because if you're only using it for something like a payment terminal, then just go for a digital payment terminal. You don't necessarily need a phone line to do that. Or go for sensor things if it's something like that you need. And I've obviously already mentioned mobile telephony. As I say, just to reiterate what we're hearing, one of the big things that we get asked is there a list of, of equipment that doesn't work? Is there a list of approved suppliers? Is there, any kind of information like that? And unfortunately, there's not. I've already mentioned it's quite hard to pin down dates. It's also a bit of a challenge that there isn't a one size fits all. So depending on exactly what you use your phone line for and what bit of equipment you have, your solution might be different to someone else on this call solution, or my solution. It's always, I mean, this is just good advice more generally, and I'm sure you've heard this and would say the same yourselves, but it's always worth shopping around. So providers vary. Don't just take the first answer you get. Do a bit of research, speak to two or three providers, see what solutions they can offer, and I'm sure you'll be able to find the one that's most appropriate. Um, and I guess really importantly, I can't kind of reiterate this enough. Although you might see things in the press or might hear on the grapevine that the deadline's January 2027, that really is only for vulnerable customers or customers who have very, very niche and specific and critical applications. So I'll give you an example. The emergency SOS phones that you see at the side of motorways, there isn't a solution to replace those at the moment. So they have been given a bit of a pass until January 2027 in the hope of finding a solution, because it's critical national infrastructure, it's safety infrastructure. But if you are an SME and you need to take payments or contact your customers, they are not critical solutions in the eyes of industry and the government. So those things are still happening now. They are still working towards the end of this calendar year, to have that work done for the vast majority of us, yourselves included. It might all sound quite negative so far, so I don't want to kind of leave you just thinking that this is all very negative. There are upsides to this as well. It's always a good opportunity to just take a step back and think, what does my business actually need in order to communicate with our staff, our customers, our supply chain? How do we do that communication? Is it via, a voice call? Is it via instant messaging? Is it via WhatsApp? Is it via email? Like, how do we communicate? Do I still need the same phone systems that I have always needed? So there's an opportunity to move to, what's called unified comms, where you might use a bit of video to speak to customers. You might use instant messaging. You might use voice, of course. But it's an opportunity to just have a bit of a rethink about how you communicate. It also gives you an opportunity, if you do have a phone system, maybe you don't need that anymore. Maybe that can save you some maintenance costs. Maybe it can save you some energy costs. Maybe it gives you some better options in terms of flexibility, to be able to work remotely and work from home, work from more than one location, and still be able to access all those things. If you have multiple users in your business, then also going to these new IP-based services gives you an opportunity to get like a pay-as-you-use service. So, you pay per user. You don't buy a phone system for 20 people. If you only need 5 people, you just pay for 5 people. And it really helps with things like hybrid working, where you can have a mix of people working on site in the business, but also people working remotely using the same system effectively. Those systems are also designed to be able to scale up and scale down really quickly. So if you're a business that has seasonal peaks and troughs, whether that's an accountancy firm getting ready for, tax year end, whether you're a florist who gets, inundated with communication around, Valentine's Day or whatever else it might be, it allows you to kind of scale very easily to take on additional staff or people to answer the phone. I guess the other advantage of going for a more cloud-based system or a less on-premise system is those things are typically a lot more secure and a lot more resilient. You are going to be buying a service from, someone like a Microsoft or someone else who will make sure that their systems are kept up to date, that they're at the most recent level of security patch, that they have power resilience because they'll be in one of their large data centers, etc. So that genuinely there are upsides if you just give some consideration to actually how you need to use telephony going forward. We also get asked, is there any kind of stopgap? Is there an interim solution? And there hasn't been, but quite recently, BT and Openreach launched 2 interim solutions. So one is called Free Digital Phone Line. That's the one that's talked about on screen at the moment. That's designed to keep phone systems and edge cases, payment terminals or what have you, connected and working where there is no viable alternative as a digital solution. Just to reiterate, that is a very small percentage of users who would be eligible to use this service. For most things, there is a viable digital alternative. That doesn't necessarily mean people are super keen to go and do that work to change. But if there's a viable alternative, you are not going to be offered this solution. It is still only a stopgap. It's only designed to work with single phone lines. So if you are a business that had 10 phone lines in a phone system, this is not the product for you anyway, and you wouldn't be allowed to buy it. They actually did stop taking orders on this on the 31st of August, but they said it would be extended, and it has been, but I really couldn't tell you what the new end date is because they haven't published one yet. So this is one of the interim solutions. The other one, which is a brand new one, is a thing called, this is a catchy title for you, SOTAP Analog. Now this is, again, just a stopgap solution. Again, it's only really intended for vulnerable and edge case users where there is not another solution. But it doesn't need a broadband connection. It's much cheaper. It doesn't need any new equipment. You don't need an engineer to come out. It's a good interim solution. It actually isn't launched yet. It doesn't launch until towards the end of October. But again, you are far better if you can just making the change properly rather than relying on these interim solutions. If you can change to a digital solution, that is the best thing to do rather than relying on these unless you absolutely have no choice. So that's a little bit about the kind of fixed telephony. But I can't really talk about that without talking about some changes that are happening on the mobile networks as well, because they do have an interrelationship. So on the mobile side, cellular solutions are part of the solution. So what we're being told and what we've heard many times now is, when people are being moved to digital telephone services, residents and businesses, they're being really commonly told, I know that this won't work in a power cut anymore, but don't worry, you can just use your mobile if there's a power cut. Well, that's fine if your mobile works where you are indoors, or if you've got good coverage and capacity. If your mobile's charged, and actually the mobile side comes with just as many challenges in terms of finding out accurate information about what coverage is like, especially if you're reliant on it as a business. So it's not quite the easy solution that it might initially seem. There's also the ongoing work to make very similar changes on the mobile network. So you will have seen, no doubt, that the 3G mobile network has already started to be switched off. And actually, three of the operators, Vodafone, EE, and Three, have already turned off their 3G networks completely, all off. O2 are in the process of turning off their 3G network. They're not quite there yet, but they're ongoing with it. But they will be finished, probably by the end of this year, early next year. Then they're going to look to turn off the 2G network. You might ask, why did they turn off the 3G one first and not the 2G one? And that's because the 2G network is the one that everyone falls back on for 999 emergency calls. If you don't have good enough, 3G, 4G, 5G coverage, but you really need to make a 999 call, it falls back to the 2G network, because that's the one that has the widest coverage, indoors and outdoors. So that's why it's taking a little bit more planning before they can turn off the 2G network. The reason they're doing this is, when they turn off those networks, they can reuse the radio spectrum to make the 4G and 5G networks better, more efficient, have better coverage, have better quality of service. So that's why they're turning them off, as well as all the usual reasons about energy savings, not needing to maintain older equipment, etc., etc. So, got to remember those funds. That shows my age. Who will be impacted by this? So, again, a wide variety of people, believe it or not, will be impacted by the 2G, 3G switch off. There's actually quite a lot of devices that already use 2G or 3G service. So again, some payment terminals, some lift lines actually were already on 2G or 3G services. Things like building management systems, like big industrial boilers or boilers that serve a whole building, lots of those things were mobile connected. Again, fire and intruder alarms, some of those had mobile connectivity. Bit of a strange one, but vending machines, quite a lot of vending machines use mobile so that they know when it's empty or when they need to empty the coin box on them. Less common now that they're contactless, but even so, they are still connected with a mobile SIM card. And if you have a car that has an SOS button or a maintenance button, normally where the interior light is, and they actually rely on the 2G network as well to get assistance if you're in an accident. So it's quite a wide range of things that actually rely on the 2G and 3G network, and that are also going to have to be changed. It's worth noting, and again, this might have an impact on you as a business, but if not, then please take it away as a residential thing. Some 4G devices still need to be upgraded when the 2G and 3G network turns off, and that's because the 4G part of the device, smartphone, will be for browsing the internet or using data services, using WhatsApp, Facebook, etc. And what it was never designed for was making and receiving telephone calls, which uses a slightly different technology called voice over LTE. Some 4G devices just didn't have it. So I've used, again, a personal example. So my mother and father-in-law both had what they thought were 4G smartphones. They could use the internet. They could send me myriad of WhatsApps, and believe me, they did. But they were told by their provider, which was O2, that they needed to upgrade their device, because if they didn't, they were no longer going to be able to make and receive a voice phone call. So they had to go in and change their devices for new devices. And there's lots of people who will be in that situation, believe it or not. They didn't have particularly old devices, I should say. So in terms of when all this stuff's happening, I've talked a little bit about, that 2027 date. This kind of goes back a bit in time, because some people have said, well, when did they decide they were doing this? Well, actually, believe it or not, in 2017 is when they decided they were going to do this. And they were very quiet for quite a while until the early 2020s, when they started kind of doing a little bit of this, testing it, doing small scale switch offs, and then that's accelerated through to 2022, 2023 when they started doing this at a national level, and now we're in the kind of tail end of that. So yeah, by the end of this year, O2 will have turned off their 3G network. Virgin Media will have turned off all of their analog phone services completely. All of the non-complex BT ones will be done by the end of this year. And then it'll only be the complex life critical or critical infrastructure ones that will have that reprieve, and they'll have a bit longer. But even then, by January 2027, so really it's only a 12-month reprieve, all of those will be done too. 2G switch off is still a little way off. That's likely to be the early 2030s, maybe 2032, 2033. It's still not being confirmed, but it's in discussion at the moment. So I've told you a little bit about what's happening on both the fixed and mobile side, what to do about it. Well, three key things I would say to take away from it. Raise awareness. So raise awareness, with your peers, and raise awareness, with your staff if you have staff. And this session is part of that awareness raising. That's why Cambridgeshire commissioned us to do this work to help raise the awareness. Think strategically about it. Like, don't wait until someone tells you, right, you're going to get switched over next week. And believe it me, the notice period's about 30 days. So you could get a phone call, or a letter tomorrow telling you this is happening to you in 30 days. Don't wait until you get that. Start thinking about it now. Like, map out what things you have which are connected to a phone line. And once you've got that map, once you've got those devices listed or those services listed, then you can think about what to do with them. We always suggest take a top-down approach. If something's business critical, if something's safety critical, do that one first. Think about how you replace that one before you do anything else. I know you'll want to do everything, but really do think about the business and safety critical ones first. Talk to suppliers. If you've got a good supplier now, great. Still talk to 2 other suppliers, and don't just ask them about replacing what you've got now, like for like. Just do that little bit of thinking to see, well, actually, is that still the right thing that I need? Does my business still work in the same way that it did traditionally? Could I make some changes? Maybe make some savings. Maybe offer a better service. A more customer friendly service. There's a number of bits of literature and information about this already. So we've helped produce a switchover guide in collaboration with Connecting Cambridgeshire and the councils. So there's a link there. These will be available for you to download, but by all means scan it now if you would like. So that'll give you some information. I'll just wait a second and then I'll move to the next one. So you've got a chance to scan it if you would like. As I said, there's also been a residential campaign going on. It's been on signage, it's been in the press, it's been on, the back of buses, etc. Bus stops. So this has been going on for a little while on the residential side in the region. So hopefully you might have seen this anyway. But if not, keep an eye out for it. And then reasonably recently, just over the summer, there was actually a national campaign launched about this. So that's kind of backed up by all the main providers: BT, Openreach, Sky, Vodafone, etc., etc. I'll not name them all. Government, Ofcom as the regulator, are also involved in this. It mainly focuses on telecare users, I have to say. The elderly lady in the photograph is a good example. But it does actually include information for businesses as well, and MPs and councils. They did it over a variety of media: TV, radio, internet, digital displays, print. Lots of it was in things like GP surgeries, in pharmacies, to try and hit the target audience they were aiming for, which was those vulnerable telecare users. I guess to that end, they think that this is going to be seen by 95% of all adults in the UK. and 98% of those people over 65. I will say personally, I have not seen this a single time in any format other than through my job. So I've not seen it on the TV or heard it on the radio or seen it on a sign anywhere. So as to whether those statistics are going to, be true, I'm not sure. It certainly hasn't been the case with me. Thankfully, I know about it through my work. But there is information out there. So I'm going to shut up now, and I'll leave that information on there for a moment. That's my contact details, if you need those. But just to say, do you have any questions? I'm happy to answer any questions. What I will say is, if you ask me, I've got a X plugged into my phone line. What do I do about that? I'm probably not going to be able to give that specific an answer. But I could give you maybe a generic answer as to what kind of thing it might be. So, has anyone got any questions? Please feel free to unmute yourself, turn your camera on if you would like to, and I'll happily answer any questions you've got. No, no questions. I will take that I've done a fantastic job of explaining that all really, really well. So much so that none of you have any questions about any of that. But if you do have any questions, my recommendation would first of all get in touch with the Connect and Cambridgeshire team, and get in touch with your provider that you have services from at the moment, whether that's BT, whether it's TalkTalk, whether it's Sky, Virgin Media, whoever. Talk to your supplier. And sorry, yep, I can see there's questions coming through in the chat. So yes, can I share the QR code again? Give me a moment. I'll reshare my screen. And indeed, I can't reshare the QR code to that one. Hopefully you can see that now. And I now can't see questions in chat again. Bear with me for a second. Now I can. So yes, Jackie, you've got that. And Eloise, thank you very much. You are very, very welcome. And Ian Nilsson, thank you as well. I guess how do you make noise about it when the infrastructure is not in the road? Great question. As I say, really first point of contact, Connect and Cambridgeshire team. They'll be able to give you some good advice about how to who to talk to, how to make some noise about that. But the other thing I would encourage you to do is please do spread the message with your peers. Spread it with family members, whether they have they're involved in the business or have their own business, or whether they're just a resident. I guess the more people who know about this, the better, is what I would say. Because if you know about it, you can start thinking about it and start being prepared for it. Any other questions? No? I'll give you another moment or so just in case anyone's typing. But if not, then we'll draw this to a close. And I thank you all. If you want recommending suppliers, how can you find suppliers? Suppliers for telephony services. So if you already have telephone systems, then I would suggest your existing supplier is a good first point of call. Failing that, without wanting to be too flippant about it, the internet is your friend. If you do a good search on what it is you're trying to find, it will almost certainly offer you a whole raft of different suppliers. We are entirely independent, so we don't recommend particular suppliers. And to be fair, even if I were minded to recommend a supplier, there would be different suppliers depending on what your application is. So it really is a case of speak to your existing provider first, speak to your peers, ask who your peers are getting equipment from or getting services from. I'm sure you'll be able to find someone that way. And yes, it took 12 months to get a wheel leave from City Fibre for a residential area. Now you can't get the install. And that is not the first time I've heard that. I have to say, um, again, honestly, the Connect and Cambridgeshire team are your best port of call for that kind of conversation. They will have links into City Fibre at a slightly different level, and they will be able to raise those things. And I'm not saying they can solve every problem, but they can certainly raise it in a slightly different way than individuals or businesses raising it. Okay, you're very welcome. So, if no more questions, then again, thank you very much for joining. I hope you found it useful. I hope you take something away from it. Hopefully, are slightly better informed than you were before you joined. And yeah, thanks again for attending. Thank you.